Hello. So in this video, I'm going to give you 6 key pieces of advice for public speaking. Now, there are an infinite number of pieces of advice for successful public speaking. What I'm going to tell you is in no sense comprehensive, but I think these are some of the most important things to be thinking about, ways to approach public speaking in order to increase your chances of success. So, the 6 things. First, I'm going to talk about the importance of eye contact. Second, speaking clearly. Third, presenting with visuals as opposed to just reading off of visuals. Fourth, consider stage space. Fifth, body posture and gesture. And sixth, staying calm. So, starting with eye contact. This is one of the most common pieces of advice with public speaking, in part because it really is incredibly important. Establishing eye contact with your audience helps to make a personal connection or create the feeling of a personal connection between you, the speaker, and them, the audience. And this actually isn't important. This isn't just important in the context of things like major speeches or YouTube videos, whatever it is, where you're actually making eye contact with the camera, but also particularly for things like job interviews, right? When you are doing a job interview, you want to make sure that you are looking at the person that you are speaking to or looking at the committee, right? Shift your focus, your eye contact between those different members of the committee. The same thing applies when you're speaking to an audience in something like a speech or a presentation, whatever it is. You want to make eye contact with the members of the audience as well as you can. And sometimes that's easier to do than others for a number of reasons. One of which may be it depends on how many people you're speaking to. I mean, I've been in a conference panel where we had 2 audience members. It was very, very easy to make eye contact with each of them, and they knew personally that you were looking at them and making that eye contact. But you may also be speaking theoretically to 1,000 people. You can't make eye contact with each one of them during a speech. So what you do instead is you let your gaze rove over the audience, right? So when I'm teaching a class, so right now my current sets of classes are capped at 22 to 24, depending on which course I get assigned. I can't actually make eye contact with each of those students because I've done this long enough that I generally just know my material. But if that was something that I was concerned about, if there was a lesson that I particularly needed to rely on lesson planning notes or something like that, or work from a PowerPoint, something like this, I can just scan the room, right? This is one technique for making it seem like you're making eye contact with individuals without necessarily having to be in direct eye-to-eye contact with everyone. You scan over the audience back and forth like this. It gives people the impression that you are looking at them. So the number of people that you're speaking to may be one challenge in terms of making eye contact. Another challenge with eye contact is that many people are anxious about it. This is one of the things that I think is most concerning for many people who have anxiety about public speaking. Sorry. And so if that's one thing that worries you with a public speaking situation, one thing that you can do is direct your gaze just about here, just slightly above a person's head. From an audience member's perspective, it will still appear that you are looking at their face, but you don't actually have to meet their eyes. And so that can be much easier for you. The caveat I put on this is that that is very awkward for a lot of people. Like, we don't intuitively feel comfortable looking just above someone's head, most of us. And so if that's a strategy that you want to use, if it's something you think would help, I would recommend going to a public place. If you're in a university or something like this, maybe go to the dining hall, student union, the library, someplace where there are a lot of people around. If you're not in a university or a school and you can't go somewhere equivalent to that, find a place where there's a number of people around, whether that's like a public park or a library, a mall, whatever it is, and just practice looking slightly above people's heads. Just sort of start training yourself to do that, to make it a little bit easier and to make it feel less awkward for you. So that's the first point. Make eye contact. Second point, speak clearly. There's a number of components to this. How well you enunciate is something that most of us have fairly limited control over. We have developed speech patterns for the most part, and our enunciation does tend to fall within those established speech patterns unless we are very consciously trying to speak in a different way. Part of the problem with trying to speak in a different way, if you wanted to speak in, say, a more elevated register than you normally do, if you are nervous about public speaking, remembering to maintain and perform that elevated register will probably become much harder. So that's a thing to be aware of. But I actually think there's two other major components that you have more control over than your enunciation, than the way in which you actually speak. And that is the volume of your voice and the speed at which you're speaking. So volume is, there's one obviously straightforward component to this. You need to speak loud enough that everyone in the audience can hear you. Sometimes that will require a microphone. I've had to speak with mics before. Yeah. Sometimes you need it. Especially if you are a very soft-spoken person, a microphone will help boost your voice so that people can hear what you are saying. Because if we can't hear you, then fundamentally we're not getting the message that you're sending. So that's straightforward. You may also want to be aware of the acoustics in the place in which you are presenting, because that actually can have a big impact on how audible you are to listeners. A place with good acoustics will make it much easier to speak at a more normal volume and still be heard. Also, when you are speaking loudly, you want to speak from here, from the diaphragm. Fill this space with air rather than screaming, rather than shouting. Because A, nobody wants to be shouted at for the entire duration of a presentation. It's incredibly uncomfortable. B, you will wreck your throat, because shouting puts a lot of emphasis, puts a lot of strain on your vocal cords, whereas speaking from the diaphragm sounds the same as normal speech, but it elevates the volume. You're capable of speaking much louder without sounding like you're shouting when you speak from the diaphragm. So while I was doing that, this portion, I could feel the air coming out from this portion of my abdomen. And so that's a really, really good technique. But then the other thing to think about in terms of speaking clearly is You want to find the sweet spot of speaking slowly enough that people can understand the words that you're saying without going so slow that it becomes boring and people fall asleep. Yeah. So speed is a really, really important component of this. And actually that can be very anxiety inducing, especially when you have a time limit and you have a lot of stuff that you want to say. Um, People who experience anxiety about public speaking will tend to speak faster because that is an anxiety response that many of us experience. Um, And if you are nervous about not being able to get through all of your material in the amount of time that you have, then naturally you're going to speak faster. So you do want to make sure that you are speaking slowly enough that people can actually hear what you're saying while still maintaining a decent pace to maintain their interest. The other concern with talking too fast is that if you are talking rather than breathing, yeah, you can pass out. You don't want to do that. That will make your presentation memorable, but not in a good way. So you want to make sure that you are taking pauses where you can breathe, where the audience can process what you've been saying, etc., along with maintaining an effective speed of speech. The next thing I want to talk about, number 3, you want to present with visuals. This is a very common experience in university that people will have a class in which an instructor just reads off the PowerPoint, and that's the whole lesson plan. And those tend to be regarded as quite boring classes because that's a quite boring method of speaking, right? If we could just read the PowerPoint ourselves and get all of the information that your presentation is going to give us, then we don't really need you. So instead, what you want to do is use your visuals, your PowerPoint or your handout or whatever it is, as a jumping off point to talk more detail about the subject matter, right? So this is part of the reason why in good PowerPoint design, you want keywords or phrases rather than written out descriptions typically. Those keywords should cue you as the presenter to say, okay, I remember what I want to say about this, and then you can provide additional information beyond what's on the visuals. This way, you are the center of attention for the presentation, and the visuals work to support you rather than the other way around, rather than you being there in the service of reading verbally what's on the screen or whatever it is, the handout, whatever it is. And so you want to engage with those visuals. You also want to think about the aesthetics of your visuals, particularly for something like a PowerPoint. It should be visually interesting enough that viewers will actually look at it. But you also want to make sure that it is not visually overwhelming or that it is not taking away from the attention on you. All right, number 4, consider stage space. So what I mean by this, basically this is, for me, it makes sense to think about this in terms of theater, right? With a theater, you have a stage. The stage has different portions of it. Upstage, downstage, stage left, stage right, etc., all these things. And there's different schemas for breaking it up. Not really important at the moment. But you will have a particular space in which you are presenting. And there's different approaches that you can take to this depending on your personal style, depending on how comfortable you are with your material, depending on the particular ways in which you, the particular effects that you want to produce on your audience. So sometimes you will present seated, like I'm doing right now. And I've done this for conferences. I've presented from a chair, and that's totally fine. That's one fine way of doing it. That centers you, that creates stability in your presentation. The same thing is true if you present from a podium and you just stay at that podium the whole time. You are centered, you reflect stability. You visually say to the audience, I am a source of authority because I am stable and stationary, and so you should learn from me. On the other hand, you can often move back and forth across a stage space. This is something that instructors will often do during lectures or discussion classes or things like this, is we'll often move around the classroom space. The same thing is often available. Sorry. The same thing is often available to you as a presenter, is you will have some kind of stage space that you can use. And if you move around that space, what that will do is create a dynamic energy, right? Because you are in motion, that suggests to your audience energy, dynamism, change, newness, etc., etc. And they get to see you from different angles, and you get to see them from different angles. So that's a really good thing to be aware of. The next thing, somewhat related to this in terms of one's physical body within space, you want to think about your body posture and gesture. If you are seated for your presentation, you generally want to sit up relatively straight. You want to make sure that you're not hunched forward. You want to, in part because hunching forward will actually make it a lot harder to project, because you constrict your abdomen, you constrict your lungs, etc., etc. And so being sat straight up and down is really, really useful. The same basic thing is true when standing at a podium. Up and down posture, upright posture will typically make it easier to breathe, make it easier to project, etc., etc. One thing that you want to generally avoid, and I'm terrible at avoiding this because I do it all the time, and I know that I do it, and I'm not going to stop doing it because it's how I do things. But you don't want to wobble or shift your weight or rock side to side or something like this. I do this all the time when I'm teaching, and when I'm giving presentations. If I'm standing, I will typically sort of shift my weight from side to side, or I will move, sort of lean, rock forward and backwards, whatever it is. And I know that that's visually not a good thing to do, but I do it anyway. It's part of my style. It's going to continue being part of my style. This is very much a do what I say, not what I do type moment. But generally, the more stable, the more sort of physically stable you are within one particular place, even if you're moving around a presentation area, trying to remain stationary, trying to remain stable when you are stationary, when you're not moving, that's going to convey solidity and confidence. You also want to think about gesture. Most of us use gesture naturally to some degree when we are speaking. Gesture is really good for emphasis. And so you may want to think about, is there a particular gesture I want to make to draw attention to this point? That was one that I will do, is this sort of pin in it type motion. this is another one that I tend to do. This is a sort of consideration gesture. Let's think about this thing. But you can, especially if you take a video of yourself without yourself seeing it and just sort of talk naturally, and then watch that video back. Watch how you gesture, watch how you move your hands, watch how you move your head, your body, etc., etc. You can start to pick up the patterns of your gesture structures, right? And then once you're aware of those things, you can start to use those strategically to your advantage, to gesture in specific ways to achieve certain visual effects. You also you want to be aware that you can over gesture. You can just talk too much with your hands to the point where it gets distracting, especially if these are big gestures where you're really like moving very quickly and the arms are going like this or whatever it is and everything like this. And I don't know why you would ever be gesturing like this, but again, that at that point, viewers are going to be watching the gesturing because there's so much movement. And so they're not going to be paying attention to what you're saying. So you want to avoid that. And then number 6, last but not least, try to remain calm. Again, this is a very difficult thing for people who have anxiety about public speaking, but it is going to make your life easier if you can figure out strategies for remaining calm. One old, probably terrible piece of advice is to picture the audience in their underwear. I would generally not recommend doing that, although if that helps you, you can. But things like taking deep breaths, counting to 10 before your presentation, pausing every once in a while to have a sip of water. If there's other things that you know will help calm you down, especially if you're a person who regularly deals with anxiety, whether that's something like ginger tea, whether that's whatever it is, if you have little rituals or something like that, figure out whatever you can do to try and minimize how much your anxiety is going to is going to impact you. And I say this in part because it will affect your presentation, but much more so because it's important for you to try and decrease things that make you anxious, make you nervous, make you upset. It's just better for you as a human being to try and respond productively to that negative affect. And so this is it's very, very important to remember that this is a space, public speaking, in which people are often very nervous. And so you want to try and plan ahead for that. So those are my key recommendations, the six top things I would suggest for public speaking. Maintain eye contact. Sorry, put my list over here and I forgot the order of them. Maintain eye contact, speak clearly, present with your visuals, use them to your advantage. Consider your stage space. Think about your body posture and gesture, and stay calm as much as you can. Okay,